Jon Snow always thought he was a bastard. He was wrong. At 16, in the cold dark of Winterfell's crypts, Ned Stark tells him the truth. His father was a dragon prince, and one wrong word means his head. So instead of vanishing to the wall, he walks straight into the lion's den. This is the secret that changes everything.
The crypts of Winterfell were the only place in the whole wide world where Jon Snow had never once felt like a bastard. Down here in the cold dark beneath the castle, there were no Lady Catelyn's eyes following him across a hall, no whispers behind cupped hands, no nameless thing in the back of his own mind reminding him that he did not quite belong. Down here there were only the dead, and the dead did not care who your mother was. The dead lay where they were laid, kings and lords of winter, their stone faces gray and patient, their iron longswords red with rust across their laps. Jon had come here 1,000 times in 16 years. He had told these silent men things he could not tell the living. Tonight he carried a candle that he did not really need. He knew the way blind. He came past the kings of winter with their stone direwolves curled at their feet, past Lord Rickard who had burned, past the empty niche that waited for his uncle Benjen and the empty niche that waited someday for his father. He stopped, as he always stopped, before the statue of a woman. She was the only woman down here among all those grim lords, and the sculptor had not been kind to her, or perhaps had simply not known her face. The likeness was rough, the stone too soft, the features blurred as if she were already half a ghost, but Jon knew who she was. Lyanna Stark. His father's sister. The aunt he had never met, dead before he was ever born, dead of a fever in a faraway tower in a war that everyone still talked about and no one ever finished talking about. "You again," said a voice behind him, and Jon nearly dropped the candle. He spun. A small shape detached itself from the shadows between two pillars, a girl, skinny as a whip, with a long horse face that was unmistakably Stark and a grin that was unmistakably trouble. "Arya." Jon pressed a hand to his chest. "7 hells, how long have you been standing there?" "Long enough to watch you talk to a statue." She came forward into the candlelight, entirely unrepentant. "You do know she can't hear you. She's stone. I checked. I poked her once and everything." "You poked the dead." Gently, Arya allowed. It seemed rude not to say hello. She tilted her head at the statue, considering it the way she considered everything, as though it had personally challenged her to a fight. "Septa Mordane says I'm to be a lady and sit still and embroider and not run off into the crypts in the middle of the night. So naturally here I am." "Naturally," Jon agreed. He could not help smiling. Arya was the one person in this castle who had never, not once, looked at him as anything other than her brother. To Arya he was simply Jon, the way Robb was simply Robb, and that simple thing was worth more to him than all the lordships in the realm. "Is it true?" she asked, suddenly serious. "The king is really coming. Robb says there'll be 300 riders. Septa Mordane says I have to wash. It's true. 2 days, maybe 3. And you're really going to the wall." There it was. Jon's smile faded a little. He looked back up at the blurred stone face of his aunt because it was easier than looking at his sisters. "Where else is there for me to go, little wolf?" "Uncle Benjen says a man can make himself a name on the wall, true name or no. Brothers of the Night's Watch don't care what your mother was." "That's what you always say." Arya scowled. "You say it like it makes it good." "It does make it good. It makes it far," she said. "Far isn't good. Far is just far." He had no answer to that because she was right, and because being right at the wrong moment was the most maddening thing about Arya Stark, so he did what he always did. He reached out and ruffled her hair until she shrieked and swatted at him, and the two of them made enough noise in that sacred, quiet place to wake every dead king in the north. "Go to bed," he told her when she had finished trying to murder him, "before Septa Mordane raises an army." "Will you walk me up?" "In a moment. I want to." He gestured vaguely at the statue, at the dark, at the things he could not say. "In a moment." Arya looked at him a long beat. Then she stood on her toes, kissed his cheek with the careless ferocity of a little sister, and was gone up the steps 2 at a time, swallowed by the dark. Jon turned back to Lyanna. "She's going to be a terror," he told the statue. "You'd have liked her, I think. Everyone says you ran wild, too." The statue said nothing. The statue never did. She would have loved her. Jon went very still. The voice had not come from the statue. It had come from the dark behind him, low and tired and unmistakable, and for one wild instant his heart hammered before his mind caught up to what his ears already knew. "Father." Lord Eddard Stark stepped into the candlelight. He moved like a man carrying something heavy that no one else could see, and the lines of his face were carved deeper than usual, as if the very stones of the crypt had pressed themselves into him. He had ice, the great Valyrian greatsword, belted at his hip, which was strange, for a man does not carry his executioner's blade to a midnight stroll among his ancestors. "How much did you hear?" Jon asked. "Enough." Ned came to stand beside him before the statue. For a long moment, father and son simply looked at the stone woman together, and neither said a word. "You come down here often." "You know I do, I know." Ned's jaw worked. "I have watched you come down here since you were a boy small enough to ride my shoulders. And every time I have told myself, tomorrow, not yet, he is too young, tomorrow." He closed his eyes. "You are 16, Jon. You mean to take the black. You mean to wall yourself away at the end of the world and never come back, and I have let you believe a lie your whole life, and I cannot." His voice cracked, and Ned Stark's voice never cracked. "I cannot send you to the wall not knowing what you are." Jon's mouth had gone dry. "What I am," he repeated. "I'm your bastard. I know what I am." "No," said Ned, "you do not." And then he told him. He told it slowly, in the flat, careful way a man crosses thin ice, testing each word before he put his weight on it. He told of a tourney at Harrenhal, 16 years gone, where a prince with silver hair and a sad harp had looked past his own wife and crowned a wild northern girl the queen of love and beauty, and how that single careless wreath of blue winter roses had set the 7 kingdoms alight. He told of a road, and a girl taken, and a war that everyone called an abduction. He told of brother dead in a dragon king's wildfire, and a father dead beside him, and the mad king laughing while they burned. He told of the trident, where the prince with the silver hair fell to a war hammer, and the rubies of his breastplate scattered into the river like drops of blood, and the rebellion was won. "Robert won his throne," Ned said, "and I rode south to finish the war. To a place called the Tower of Joy in the Red Mountains of Dorne. 3 of the Mad King's finest knights were there, the Kingsguard, the White Cloaks, the best blades in the realm. They should have been guarding the new king's heir. Instead they were guarding a tower in the desert, hundreds of leagues from any throne. I have wondered all my life why. I think I have always known why. I simply did not want to." "Father." Jon's voice was barely a whisper. "What was in the tower?" Ned looked at him. There were tears in the cold gray Stark eyes, and Jon had never in his life seen his father weep. "My sister," he said. "Lyanna, in a bed of blood. She had been brought to childbed, and the fever had her, and she was dying, and there was nothing in the world any of us could do." He drew a breath that shook. "She was not stolen, Jon. That was the lie we let the realm believe, because the truth would have started the war all over again. She went with Rhaegar willingly. She loved him, and before she died she made me swear a promise. She took my hand in both of hers, so small her hands, she was always so small, and she begged me. 'Promise me, Ned.' She said it over and over until the words ran together. 'Promise me.'" The candle guttered. The crypt seemed to lean in close. "Promise you what?" Jon breathed, though some part of him, some deep, drowning, dawning part, already knew, to protect her son. Ned reached out and gripped Jon's shoulder hard, as though he feared the boy might fall or fly or simply come apart in the cold air. "You were the babe in that bed of blood, Jon. You are her son. Lyanna Stark was your mother." Jon could not breathe. The world had tilted on some hidden hinge, and everything he had ever known was sliding slowly off the edge of it. Then he swallowed. "Then you're my uncle, you're not my father." "I am the only father you have known." Ned's grip did not loosen. "And I have loved you as a son every day of your life, and that I will swear to in any sept in the realm. But your blood, Jon, your blood is hers, and—" He hesitated, and in that hesitation Jon felt the second blow coming before it landed. "Who was my father?" Jon asked. "Say it, I want you to say it." "Rhaegar," said Ned Stark. "Rhaegar Targaryen, the prince at the tourney, the prince at the trident, the dragon prince." He said the name as though it cost him blood. "You are no bastard, Jon, you never were. You are the son of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark, and you are the last living trueborn heir of House Targaryen, and that," his voice dropped to something hard and terrible, "is a truth that can put your head on a spike before the moon turns if the wrong man ever hears it." Afterward, Jon could never quite put in order the way the feelings came. First was disbelief, flat and stubborn, a wall he threw up against the whole impossible weight of it. It was a jape. It was a fever dream. His father, his uncle, some lord, had finally lost his northern wits in the dark. People did not simply learn in a single breath in a crypt that they were the last dragon in the world. Then came grief, and it took him by surprise because he had not known a man could grieve a mother he had never met. But he grieved her, the wild girl who ran with the wolves, who loved a doomed prince, who died with his name on her lips and Jon's blood on her hands. All his life he had imagined his mother as some shamed woman his father would not name, a serving girl, a fisherman's daughter. He had built her in his mind out of his own loneliness. And she had been Lyanna Stark all along, laughing up there in the stone, and no one had ever let him grieve her, because no one had ever let him know then. And this shamed him, but it came all the same, came something almost like joy. Because all his life, in the worst of his small hours, Jon had wondered if there was something wrong in him. Some flaw, some stain, some reason his mother had no name and his place in the world had no shape, and there was no flaw. There had never been a flaw. He was not the leavings of some careless tumble in a war camp. He was loved. He was the child of a love so great it had burned down a dynasty. His mother had wanted him so fiercely that she had spent her last breath making her brother swear to keep him safe. And then, swallowing all of it cold and final, came fear. "The king," Jon said. The word tasted like iron. "Robert, he's 2 days out. He could not finish. He killed your father at the Trident," Ned said quietly. "Yes, and he hates them, the Targaryens. Everyone knows it." "He doesn't just hate them, Jon had heard the stories, the way everyone in the north had heard them, told as triumph at 100 feasts. He smiles when he talks about it. He calls them dragon spawn. He sent men to murder the last of them across the sea, a girl and a babe. The full shape of it crashed over Jon at last. "He'd kill me. If he knew what I am, he would kill me at his own friend's table." "Yes," said Ned, "he would. He would weep while he did it, and he would call it mercy, and he would never understand for one heartbeat that he had murdered the son of the woman he claims to have loved above all others. That is the man who is coming to my gates, Jon. That is the man who will sit at my high table and drink my wine and clap you on the shoulder and call you a fine northern lad. And you will smile, you will pour his cup, and you will give him not the smallest reason in the world to look twice at your face." "My face," Jon repeated. "You have the Stark look," Ned said. "The gods were kind in that, at least. Dark of hair, long of face, you favor your mother and her brother and me. There is little of the dragon in you to see. But Robert loved Lyanna more than he has ever loved his own queen, and a man who has spent 16 years mourning a face." He stopped. "He may see her in you, Jon. He saw her in the statue and wept like a child the last time he came. If he sees her in you, he will think it sentiment. He must never think it anything else." From inside his cloak, Ned drew something out, a roll of parchment, old and yellowed, bound in a faded ribbon and sealed with wax gone dark with age. "What is that?" "Proof," said Ned. "Of the only part of the truth that might one day save your life instead of ending it." He turned it over in his scarred hands. There was a septon at the Tower of Joy, an old man, half-blind, who had served the prince in secret. "He died not long after your mother, but before he died he gave me this and made me swear to keep it. I have kept it 16 years in a place no one living knows." "What does it say?" "It is a record of a marriage." Ned met his eyes. Rhaegar set Princess Alia aside. Whether the faith would call it lawful is a quarrel for Meisters, but it was done and witnessed. "And he wed your mother before gods and men in a sept in the Dornish mountains." "Do you understand what that means, Jon? It means you are not a bastard born of scandal. It means you are true-born. It means that if House Targaryen should ever rise again, and there are 2 of them yet living across the narrow sea, a boy and a girl, the Mad King's last children, then by every law of the 7 kingdoms you stand before them, not behind, before." Jon stared at the little roll of parchment as though it were a coiled snake. "Why are you telling me this? Why now? You could have let me go to the wall. I'd have lived and died a bastard and never known and been," the word stuck, "safe. Because safe is a lie I can no longer afford to tell you." Ned's voice was iron and grief together. "The king does not come to Winterfell for the hunting, Jon. Jon Arryn is dead, the old hand, the man who raised Robert and me both. Died sudden, and his widow has fled to the Eyrie and sealed her gates, and she writes to my lady wife that he was poisoned. Murdered. Robert comes to make me his new hand. He will ask, and I cannot refuse a king, and that means I am about to ride into the deepest pit of vipers in the realm with my daughters at my side, and you. Me, I will not leave you here." Ned said it before Jon could ask. "With me gone south and Robb left lord, Catelyn rules Winterfell in all but name, and she has never," he sighed. "It is no place for you with me far away, and the wall," his hand tightened on the parchment. I'll not send a 16-year-old boy who has just learned he is the last dragon in the world to swear away his life forever at the end of the earth on the strength of a single night's grief. Not yet. Not until you have had time to know what you are and to choose for yourself what to do with it. Whatever that proves to be. And if I choose the throne, Jon asked. He did not know where the question came from. It frightened him, hearing it in his own mouth. Something crossed Ned Stark's face then, something old and haunted, the look of a man who had seen exactly where that road led, who had carried his best friend's broken sister out of a desert at the end of it. Then you would be a fool, he said softly. And I would still love you, and I would do everything in my power to keep you alive long enough to grow wiser. The blood does not make a king, Jon. I have known 3 kings now. The blood made every one of them. It is not the blood that matters. It is the man. Remember that, whatever else you forget tonight, the blood is not the man. He pressed the parchment back inside his cloak. You will tell no one, not Robb, not Arya, though it will gnaw at you, for I know how you love her. No one. The number of people living who know this secret is 3, myself, Howland Reed, and now you. Every soul that learns it is one more sword that might fall on your neck. Do you understand me? 3, Jon said numbly. And my mother knew, and the Septon, and the king's own father. Everyone who ever knew is dead, father. Everyone dies who knows. Ned did not answer that. Perhaps there was no answer. He only drew his son, his sister's son, his blood and not his blood, the boy he had raised and the dragon he had hidden into a fierce, silent embrace, there in the dark before the blurred stone face of the woman who had made him swear. Jon did not sleep that night, and when at last he did, he dreamed. He had dreamed of Ghost before, slipped into the great white direwolf's skin the way a hand slips into a glove, run the dark woods on 4 legs with the cold wind full of 1,000 living scents. That was an old magic and a secret one, and it had crept up on him slowly over the years until he half understood it. It cost him. Always it cost him. He would wake with his head pounding and the day half gone and the taste of blood at the back of his throat, and the longer he stayed in the wolf, the worse the toll. But it was his, this one strange gift, the one thing in all the world that was Jon's and Jon's alone. This dream was not Ghost. This dream was fire. He stood on a black plain under a sky the color of an old bruise, and the air was hot enough to crack stone, and there was a sound he had never heard in his waking life and yet knew at once, the way you know your own name, the vast, slow beat of wings. 3 shadows wheeled across that wounded sky, far off and enormous, and where they passed the dark caught fire. And on the ground below them, small and silver-haired and very far away, a girl stood unburned in a ring of flame with her arms thrown wide, and she was looking for something. Looking and looking, as though she had lost something long ago and never stopped searching the whole wide world for it. She turned her head, and for one impossible heartbeat across all that fire and distance, she seemed to look straight at him. Jon woke with his heart slamming, and his face wet, and the gray light of dawn at the window. For a long while he lay still, not daring to move, the dream already fraying at the edges the way dreams do, but the wings stayed with him. The wings and the girl and the 3 burning shadows. At the foot of his bed, Ghost lifted his head. The direwolf's red eyes found Jon's in the half-dark and held them steady and knowing, and Jon had the eerie certainty that the wolf had felt it too, the heat, the wings, the far-off pull of something rising in the east. You felt that, Jon whispered. Didn't you? Ghost said nothing. Ghost never made a sound, but he came up the length of the bed and lay his great white head on Jon's chest, heavy and warm, and the 2 of them watched the gray dawn brighten into a cold, clear morning, and neither of them slept again. They came on the 3rd day as the bells rang noon. All of Winterfell turned out in the yard to receive them, scrubbed and shivering in the autumn chill, the household in their best, the small folk crowding the walls. Jon stood where a bastard stood, at the back, near the end of the line, half hidden behind his brothers, exactly where he had stood his whole life and exactly where, today, he was glad to stand. Catelyn had told him to keep apart so that no royal eye should fall on the stain of him at her family's moment of glory. For the first time in 16 years, Jon thanked her for it in his heart, because then the gates opened and the column rode in, and Jon saw the king. Robert Baratheon had been a warrior once. The songs said he had been a giant, that he had crushed Rhaegar's chest with a single blow of that great antlered war hammer and laughed in the river while he did it. The man who heaved himself down off his warhorse now was a different thing, vast and red-faced and gray-bearded, his belly straining at a doublet sewn with the crowned stag, sweating wine in the cold. But the eyes were the same. Jon saw it even from the back of the yard. The eyes were still a warrior's eyes, small and shrewd and quick to anger, set in all that ruin of feasting. Those were the eyes that had watched his father die. Jon stood very still and made his face a wall, the way he had practiced before the polished steel of his looking-glass all that long gray morning, until it felt like another man's face entirely. He had thought, in the safe dark of the crypts, that he understood his father's warning. He understood nothing. He understood it now, standing 50 feet from the man, his heart a fist of ice in his chest. Smile, pour the cup, give him no reason, he could do it, he would do it. He had been hiding what he was his whole life. He had simply never known until 3 nights ago exactly how much he had to hide. The king ignored the kneeling Lord of Winterfell entirely and walked straight past him. And for one heart-stopping moment, Jon thought, he knows, somehow he knows, he's coming for me. But Robert did not so much as glance down the line of bastard sons. He went to Ned, hauled him up out of his bow by the shoulder, looked him up and down, and barked a laugh that rattled off the granite walls. "You got fat," the king announced to the Lord of the North. A pause. Then Ned, dry as the crypts, "Your Grace." Robert roared and crushed him in an embrace, and the whole tense yard let out its breath at once and remembered to be glad. And somewhere down the line, Arya snorted with laughter and was instantly shushed. Jon almost smiled. Almost. He let himself have that much, one corner of his mouth, the safe and bastard quiet amusement of a boy at the back of the yard who was nobody at all. Then the king's eyes moved. "Take me to your crypt," Robert was saying, his great voice gone suddenly rough. "I want to pay my respects." And as he said it, as Ned's face tightened and the queen's lips thinned to a line of golden displeasure behind him, the king's restless gaze swept down the assembled Starks, over Robb, over Bran, over Rickon clutching his mother's skirts, and snagged, for the briefest of instants. On the dark-haired boy half hidden at the back, it was nothing. It was a heartbeat. The king's eye passed over Jon the way a man's eye passes over 100 faces in a crowd and moved on and forgot him. But in that heartbeat, Jon saw something flicker in that ruined warrior's face. A shadow, a softness, a grief 16 years old and not one day faded. And he knew, with a cold and total certainty that turned his blood to meltwater, exactly what the king had seen. He had seen Lyanna. Then Robert turned away toward the crypts, and the woman waiting in the dark. And Jon Snow stood alone at the back of the yard with the secret of his blood beating in his throat like a second frightened heart, and understood that the longest and most dangerous game of his life had just begun. The great hall of Winterfell had never held so much noise, so much heat, or so many men who would have happily seen Jon Snow dead. They did not know it, of course. That was the strange black joke of the whole evening, the one Jon turned over and over behind the careful mask of his face, as he carried a flagon of summer wine down the length of the high tables. Not one of these laughing, roaring, grease-fingered Southron knights had the faintest idea that the quiet bastard refilling their cups was the very thing their king had spent a lifetime trying to scrub from the earth. They would toast him if they knew his name. Then they would kill him. Both probably before the wine had time to cool. 3 nights ago, this had been the worst seat in the world, the bastard's place, serving at his own family's table beneath the salt, beneath notice. Tonight, Jon understood it for the gift it was. No one watched a servant. He could move where he liked, hear what he liked, study every face in the hall, and no one's eyes ever once came to rest on him. He had spent his whole life resenting that. Now it might be the only thing keeping his head on his shoulders, and he meant to use it, so he watched. He watched the king first, because he could not help it. Robert sprawled in the Lord's high seat with a girl half on his knee and a horn of ale in his fist, bellowing some story about a battle to men who had heard it 40 times and laughed anyway. He was a wreck of a man and a frightening one, and Jon could not look at him without a cold finger drawing itself down his spine. That is the hand that broke my father's chest. That is the smile that watched him drown. He watched the queen next. Cersei Lannister sat beside her husband like a woman trapped in a cage with a bear, golden and beautiful, and entirely without warmth. Her green eyes moving over the hall the way a moneylender's move over a debtor's furniture. Twice Jon saw her glance at her own husband with a look that should have curdled the wine in his cup. Robert never noticed. Robert was busy with the girl and the ale and the battle that he had won 16 years ago and would apparently go on winning until he died. And he watched the queen's brother, and that was the one that made his hand tighten on the flagon until his knuckles went white. Sir Jaime Lannister sat in his white Kingsguard cloak, golden and bored and beautiful as a sword, and he was the man, everyone knew it. It was sung and whispered and laughed about across the 7 kingdoms, who had put his blade through the back of the mad King Aerys, Jon's grandfather. The man had been a monster, by every account a screaming, burning monster, and Jon felt no grief for him at all. But it was a strange and dizzying thing to stand in a warm hall pouring wine 10 feet from the man who had killed your grandfather, and to know that not one soul in the world, but you understood that the two facts had anything to do with one another. My family, Jon thought, with something between hysteria and horror, has died in pieces at the hands of nearly every great house in this room, and I'm pouring their wine. You're staring, said a voice at his elbow, which is rude, and you're frowning while you do it, which is worse. If you mean to glare at the Kingslayer all night, at least have the courtesy to do it where he can see you. He so loves the attention. Jon looked down and found the queen's other brother grinning up at him. Tyrion Lannister was a small man made of mismatched parts, with one green eye and one black, a forehead too large and legs too short, and a goblet that appeared to be a permanent extension of his hand. He had claimed a stool near the foot of the hall, well away from his royal sister, which told Jon something all on its own. "You're Lord Eddard's bastard," Tyrion said. It was not a question. "The one they keep at the back, Snow. Jon Snow, my lord." He kept his voice even, a servant's voice. "Sit." "No, truly, sit. You're giving me a crick in my neck, and at my height the world gives me quite enough of those already." Tyrion kicked a stool out with one stunted leg. "Drink with me. A man should never drink alone at a feast. It's the saddest thing in the world, a lonely man at a crowded table. Besides, you've the only interesting face in this hall. Everyone else is either drunk, dull, or my relations, and frequently all three." Against every instinct, Jon sat. It was easier than refusing, and refusing drew the eye. "You don't drink much," Tyrion observed, watching Jon barely wet his lips. "Wise, the wine's only good until it isn't, and then it's a knife. Tell me, Snow, they say you mean to take the Black, the Wall, the Night's Watch." "I'd thought to," Jon said carefully. "Thought to, past tense. Interesting." The mismatched eyes were sharper than the wine should have allowed. "Well, before you go freezing your manhood off for honor and gruel, let me give you something more useful than the recruiters will. You're a bastard. No, don't bristle, you do it well, but don't. I'm a dwarf, which the gods seem to think a fine jape, and you're a bastard, which the gods think the same, and we are the only two people in this hall who will ever tell each other the truth. So hear it." He leaned in. "Never forget what you are, the rest of the world will not. Wear it like armor, and it can never be used to hurt you." Jon sat very still. It was, he would think later, the best advice anyone gave him that whole long year, and the dwarf could have no idea that he had given it to precisely the wrong man. Wear it like armor. But Jon was not a bastard. He never had been. The armor Tyrion was telling him to wear was a thing he no longer owned. What he carried now was not armor at all. It was a blade with no hilt, and the only way to hold it was by the edge, and it cut you whether you gripped it or set it down. "Why tell me that?" Jon asked. Tyrion shrugged and drained his cup. "Because no one ever told me, and I had to bleed to learn it, and bleeding is overrated." He hopped down off his stool with the practiced grace of a man who had been hopping down off things his whole life. "Good luck on your wall, Jon Snow. Or wherever it is you've actually decided to go, you've the look of a man with a secret, and that's the only kind worth knowing." He toddled off toward the wine, and Jon stared after him, his heart going too fast. The look of a man with a secret. He would have to do better than that. He would have to do a great deal better than that, and starting tonight. His uncle found him later, out in the cold of the yard where Jon had fled to breathe. Benjen Stark wore the black of the Night's Watch as easily as other men wore their skin, lean and weathered and smelling of horse and snow. He had ridden down from Castle Black for the king's visit, and of all the men in Winterfell, he was the one Jon had most wanted to see 3 nights ago. 3 nights ago, Jon had rehearsed this very conversation 100 times. "Take me back with you, uncle. Let me say the words. Let me make myself something." He had been so sure. "There you are," said Benjen. "Hiding from the feast or from the king, the heat," Jon lied. Benjen leaned against the wall beside him and looked up at the cold stars. "Your father tells me you've a mind for the watch. I'll be honest with you, Jon, we need men. Good men, young men, men who can think and not just swing. The wall is held by graybeards and thieves and the leavings of the dungeons, and it should not be, and a boy like you could rise high there. Name or no name, The Black brothers don't ask what your mother was. There it was, the very thing he had dreamed of. Offered to him freely in the cold and the quiet with no one to see him take it. And Jon found, to his own astonishment, that he could not, because the watch was for life. A man swore the words, and that was the end of him. No crown, no children, no claim, no holding, nothing of the world ever again. 3 nights ago that had been the whole appeal, a clean ending to a life with no clean place in it. But 3 nights ago Jon Snow had not known that he was the last true-born dragon in the world, that there was a girl across the sea with 3 living dragons, and his own claim standing before her. That there was a sealed marriage hidden in his uncle's cloak, and a war his father was riding south to walk into blind. He did not want the throne. The thought of it still frightened him sick. But to swear it all away forever tonight in grief, before he even understood what he was throwing off. His father's words came back to him, the only inheritance he had. I'll not send a boy who has just learned he is the last dragon to swear away his life on the strength of a single night's grief. I can't, Jon heard himself say. Not yet, uncle, I'm sorry, I thought I could, I find I can't. Benjen turned and looked at him for a long, searching moment, and Jon made himself meet the gray, stark eyes that were so like his own, so like his mother's, and gave nothing away. Well. His uncle said at last, slowly, that's not the answer I expected from you. A month past your letters were full of nothing else. A month past I was a boy. It was, Jon thought, the truest thing he had said all night. And now my father's going south and he wants me with him. That part at least he could say. I'd not leave him to it alone. Benjen studied him a moment longer, and something in the older man's face softened and saddened at once, as if he had glimpsed a door closing that he had hoped to keep open. The wall will still be there, he said quietly. It always is. If the world breaks your heart in the south, and it will, Jon, the south breaks every northern heart that wanders into it, the wall will still be standing and we will still need men. Remember that. I will. Benjen clasped his shoulder once, hard, and went back inside to the noise and the light, and Jon stood alone in the cold and felt the first door of his old life swing shut behind him forever. He should have gone to bed. He knew it even as he lingered. But the yard was quiet and the hall was not, and so when the side door banged open and the king himself came staggering out into the dark, Jon was still standing there in the shadow of the wall with nowhere good to go. Robert was drunk past the roaring, past the laughing, into the heavy melancholy that lived underneath. He had a wineskin in one fist, and he had come out to piss or to weep or simply to be away from his queen, and he did not see Jon at first. Jon held himself flat against the cold stone and prayed to every god he had ever half believed in that the king would do his business and go. The gods, as ever, were not listening. Robert's bleary eye found him. You, boy, come here. There was no refusing a king. Jon stepped out of the shadow into the thin starlight, his heart a cold stone, and bowed. Your grace. Don't your grace me, I've had a bellyful of it. Robert squinted at him, swaying. Whose are you? You've the northern look, stark look. Lord Eddard's, your grace, his. The word, the armor, the lie that was no longer a lie, his bastard. Jon Snow, a bastard, Robert grunted. Ned's, quiet Ned with a bastard, there's a thing. And then he went still, the wineskin halfway to his mouth, and he looked at Jon, really looked, the bleary eyes narrowing, the great ruined face going slack and strange in the starlight, and Jon felt the ground open up beneath him, because Robert was not seeing a bastard anymore. Jon could see it. The king was seeing something else, something far away and long ago, some shape behind Jon's face that pulled the drunken grief right up out of him and into his eyes. You've got, Robert's voice had gone thick, the look of gods, the eyes, the long face, you've got the look of, he stopped. His jaw worked. For one endless heartbeat Jon stood at the edge of the cliff his father had warned him of, certain the next word out of the king's mouth would be a name that would end him. Of the north, Robert finished heavily and looked away and drank. All you wolves have it. That cold gray look like you're already mourning something. Ned has it, had it the day I met him. Boys raised in this God's cursed cold, you all come out half buried. He wiped his mouth. Get inside, boy, it's no night to be out. And fetch your father to me, I've a thing to ask him and I'd rather ask it drunk. At once, your grace. Jon bowed and walked, did not run, walked on legs that had gone to water, back toward the light, and only when the door was shut behind him did he let himself shake. It had been nothing. A drunk man's sentiment, the look of the north, but Jon had seen what lived behind the king's eyes in that heartbeat before he looked away, and it was not the north. It was a woman. It was a wreath of winter roses 16 years dead. His father had been right to the letter. Robert saw Lyanna in him. And the only thing that had saved Jon's life was that the king loved his dead aunt too much to ever once imagine she had loved someone else enough to give that face to a son. The lie that protected Jon was the same lie that was rotting Robert from the inside, and Jon was going to have to live inside it, smiling, for as long as the man drew breath. The bargain was struck the next morning, and it was struck almost exactly as Ned had said it would be. Robert wanted Ned for his hand. Ned could not refuse a king. And so the Lord of Winterfell would ride south to King's Landing, and with him a household, his daughters Sansa and Arya to be raised at court, and a handful of men. And one quiet, dark-haired bastard for whom no one could quite find a tidy reason, except that the Lord wished it, and a lord did not need a reason for the disposal of his own base-born son. Lady Catelyn did not like it. Jon heard the edge of the quarrel through a door he was not meant to be near, her voice low and hard, asking why the boy must go south, why he must be thrust into the king's own city to shame her before the realm, why he could not be sent to the wall as had always been the plan. And his father's voice, lower and harder still, allowing none of it, giving her no reason at all save that it was his will and the matter was closed. Jon walked away before he could hear more. He did not need to hear more. He understood now what it cost his father to keep this secret, that Ned would let his own wife think him cruel and strange rather than tell her a truth that could get them all killed. The number who knew was 3. It would stay 3. His father would carry the weight of looking like a worse man than he was, every day, sooner than let it grow to 4. There was, in all of it, exactly one bright thing, and her name was Arya. "We're going together," she announced, having tracked Jon down in the armory the way she tracked down everything. "To the south, you and me both. Sansa's pleased as a cat in cream because she's to marry the stupid prince, but I get you, so I win." "You win," Jon agreed gravely. "I always win," she frowned. "Septa Mordane says King's Landing has 1,000 people and they all smell. Is that true? I've never been. We'll find out together." "Good." She looked, suddenly, much younger than her years and much more uncertain, and Jon's heart turned over in his chest. He could not tell her. Of all the people in the world he most wished he could tell, it was this fierce small sister who had never once looked at him as anything but her brother. And she was the one he could never, ever tell, because telling her would be the cruelest thing he could do. It would not give her a secret. It would give her a knife to carry, and she was too young and too honest to carry it, and it would get her killed. So instead, he gave her the other thing. He had it made in secret, paid the smith Micken with coin he'd saved for years. A sword, but a small one, slender as a finger, light enough for a skinny girl's wrist, sharp as winter. He brought it out now from where he'd hidden it in the straw and put it in her hands. Arya's eyes went enormous. "Is this slender for a slender girl?" Jon said. "Be careful you don't stick yourself. There's a point on the end. That's the whole idea of the thing." "I know which end is the pointy end," she said, indignant and delighted at once, turning the little blade so it caught the light. "Most of the time. Does it have a name? All the best swords have names. Ice, Longclaw. What's mine?" Jon thought of her, the small terror, the thorn in every Septa's side. "You'll think of something with a point." "Needle," Arya breathed instantly, certainly the way she did everything. "It's a needle. Sansa can keep her needles. This is mine." She threw her arms around his middle and squeezed until his ribs creaked. "Don't tell Septa Mordane or Mother or anyone. Your secret," Jon promised, "is safe with me." And he meant it more completely and more sadly than she could ever know, for he was a boy made entirely of secrets now, and he had just learned exactly how heavy even a small one could be to carry, and exactly how much he loved the people he would have to carry his from. It happened 2 days before they were to leave, and it changed everything, though Jon would not understand how much until much later. Bran fell. The boy was a climber, had been since he could walk, scaling the walls and towers of Winterfell like a squirrel, his mother's despair and his own great joy. Everyone in the castle had warned him 100 times. Everyone in the castle had also, secretly, never once believed he would fall because Bran never fell. Bran's hands knew the stone the way a singer's know the strings. And then one bright cold morning a maid screamed in the yard, and they found him crumpled at the foot of the broken tower, small and still and wrong, his legs bent in ways that legs did not bend. He did not die. That was the mercy and the cruelty both. He breathed and his heart beat, but he did not wake, and the Maester shook his head and would not meet anyone's eyes and spoke of the spine, and of how even if the boy woke, he would never walk again. Never climb, never run, this boy who had been made of nothing but climbing and running. Jon went to him. He was not meant to. Catelyn would not leave the bedside, and Catelyn could not bear the sight of Jon. So he went in the gray hour before dawn, when even grief must sometimes sleep. And he sat by his little brother and held the small, still hand and said the things you say to someone who cannot hear you. He was good at that. He had practiced his whole life on the dead in the crypts. But Jon was not the boy he had been a week ago, and the boy he was now had a new and unwelcome habit. He could not stop watching, weighing, asking why. And so even in his grief, some cold, clear part of his mind worried at the thing like a dog at a bone. Bran never fell. The morning he fell, the king's whole court was within these walls. The boy had climbed up the broken tower, the one place no one ever went, the one place a person might do a thing they did not want seen. And when they found him, the queen had gone very white and very still, and her golden brother had laughed too loud and too quick at someone's poor jape. And Jon had marked it without knowing he was marking it, the way you mark a wrong note in a familiar song. He had no proof. He had nothing but a feeling, and a feeling was not a thing you could take to a lord, let alone a king. A week ago he would not even have had the feeling. He would have grieved his brother and thought it a terrible accident and nothing more. But his father had given him a truth that had taught him, in a single night, the first hard lesson of the game. That the powerful do terrible things in high, quiet places and call them accidents and smile through the funerals. Jon had learned to look for the knife behind the smile because his own life now depended on it. And looking, he thought he saw one. He said nothing. There was nothing yet to say. But he sat by his broken brother in the gray dawn and made himself a promise as solemn as any his father had sworn in any crypt, that he would watch, from this day forward, with both eyes open, that he would learn this game whether he wished to or not, that he would not be a boy who things simply happened to, ever again, because boys that things happened to ended up like the small, still shape in this bed, or like a prince in a river with rubies scattering downstream. And Jon Snow had survived 16 years by being beneath notice. And he did not intend to die now that he had finally learned he was worth noticing. 3 days later, the great column rode out through the gates of Winterfell and turned its face to the long road south. The king and the queen, the lord and his daughters, the imp and the kingslayer. And one quiet, dark-haired young man on a gray horse with a white direwolf padding silent at his stirrup, riding into the den of every enemy his blood had ever made, with both eyes open at last. It took them a month to reach King's Landing, and somewhere in that month Jon Snow stopped being a boy who had only ever known one castle and became a young man who understood, for the first time, exactly how large and how strange the world truly was. The north had been one endless gray country of pine and stone and cold. The south unrolled before them like a bolt of bright cloth, green fields fat with the long summer's last harvest, towns and holdfasts crowded close, rivers wide as the world, seps with their seven-sided roofs and their bells. More people in a single market square than Jon had seen in his whole life put together. He rode at the rear of the column where a bastard rode, with Ghost loping silent at his stirrup, and he drank it all in with the hungry attention of a man who had only just learned he might have a stake in the wide world after all. Ghost frightened the Southrons. The direwolf was near the size of a small pony now, white as bone with eyes like coals, and he padded through their camps each night like a ghost indeed, and the king's men crossed the road to be away from him. That suited Jon. A thing that frightens men is a thing men leave alone, and Jon had reasons of his own to wish to be left alone. Tyrion Lannister, alone of all the Southron party, was not frightened of the wolf or of much else. He had taken to riding at the rear with Jon. The only conversation in this entire crawling circus worth the having, he said, perched on his stunted horse with a book in one hand and a wineskin in the other, and somewhere in the long dusty days the two of them became something that Jon had not expected and did not entirely trust. Friends. You watch people, Tyrion said one evening as they rode through the gathering dark. Have you noticed you do it? Most men your age watch only for two things, a fight coming or a girl passing. You watch the way a maester reads a wound. You watch the king's steward cheat the innkeep this morning and say nothing, and you watched the queen not eat her supper last night, and you watched me notice you watching just now, and you've already decided what to do about it. He smiled his crooked smile. Where does a bastard of the frozen north learn to watch a room like a Lannister? I had a lot of time to practice, Jon said. Nobody watches the bastard, so I watched them. The view from beneath the table. Tyrion nodded as if Jon had said something wise. It's the best seat in any hall, you know, for a man who wants to understand it. The lords up high see only each other. The ones below the salt see everything. Half the great players of this game would give a finger to learn what you learned for free, that the world tells you all its secrets if you've only the humility to be ignored while it does. He took a pull from the skin. I'll give you one more lesson since you took the last one so well, and then I'll leave off educating you, because an educated bastard is a dangerous thing and I'd hate to be blamed. Here it is. We're going to a city where everyone lies. Everyone, Jon, all the time about everything, as easy as breathing, the high septon, the king, my sweet sister, the little man who runs the brothels and the treasury both. In King's Landing the truth is a foreign coin, and a man who carries it gets robbed. And how does a man survive a city like that? He learns the local currency, said Tyrion. Or he stays very, very quiet and lets the liars destroy each other and picks through what's left. Your Lord Father, gods keep him, has never learned to do either. He'll walk into that nest of vipers carrying his honor in front of him like a lantern, and he'll wonder why everything with teeth comes straight for the light. It was said lightly, the way Tyrion said everything. But Jon felt it land like a stone in cold water, the ripples spreading, because it was the very thing he had been afraid of since the crypts and had not had words for until now. His father was the best and most honorable man Jon knew. And in the place they were going, Jon was beginning to understand. That might be the most dangerous thing a man could possibly be. They smelled King's Landing before they saw it. 500,000 souls, Tyrion had said, packed inside 3 great hills and a crumbling wall, and every one of them living and pissing and dying atop the last. So that the whole city breathed out a single vast warm reek of smoke and fish and flowers, and rot that rolled out to meet them on the road like a held breath, finally let go. Then they crested the last rise, and there it was below them in the river bend, sprawling and golden and filthy in the afternoon sun. The greatest city in the 7 kingdoms, its rooftops crammed shoulder to shoulder, the great sept crowning one hill in marble and crystal, and crowning another. Vast and red and brooding, the seat of kings, the Red Keep. Jon looked at it a long while as they rode down toward the gates. Somewhere inside those red walls, 300 years ago, his ancestors had ruled the world from a throne made of 1,000 melted swords. Somewhere inside those walls, his grandfather had burned men alive and laughed. Somewhere inside those walls, a princess and 2 small children of his own house had been butchered in their beds the day the city fell, and the man who let it happen sat the throne to this day. The Red Keep was the heart of everything Jon's blood had ever been, and everything it had ever lost, and he rode toward it now as a nameless bastard in another man's tale, and he felt the great red weight of it settle over him like a hand. Grim-looking pile, isn't it? Tyrion remarked, following his gaze. They say Meager the Cruel had the masons who built it put to death, so none could match its secrets. The whole place is riddled with passages no living man has the map of, hidden doors, dry wells, ways behind the walls. A clever rat could go anywhere in that castle and never once be seen. He glanced sidelong at Jon. Not that I'd know anything about clever rats. Jon filed it away, ways behind the walls, a clever thing unseen, without quite knowing yet why he was filing it. He was learning to do that. To keep things. You never knew his new self was teaching his old self, which small kept thing would one day save your life. Lord Eddard Stark was made the king's hand, and within a fortnight Jon understood that his father was drowning. It was a quiet drowning, the kind no one watching would have named, because Ned drowned the way he did, everything upright, grim-faced, never once crying out. But Jon saw it, because Jon had become his father's shadow. With Lady Catelyn far away at Bran's bedside, and not a soul in this poisoned city Ned could trust, the Lord of Winterfell had drawn close to him the one person in all the world who already carried his deadliest secret and could carry one more, his sister's son. Jon attended him. Jon stood in the corners of his solar while lords came and went. Jon poured the wine as ever and listened as ever, and at night when the candles burned low his father would sometimes speak to him plainly as he could speak to no one else. And in those quiet hours Jon learned the shape of the trap closing around them both. There was the master of coin, Lord Petyr Baelish, whom they called Littlefinger, A small, smiling man with a pointed beard and a pointed wit and eyes that never smiled with the rest of his face. He had been a ward of Catalan's family long ago. He spoke of the old friendship warmly. He offered Ned his help at every turn, and Ned, who had no other friend at court, took it. "I don't like him," Jon said one night when Baelish had gone. "You don't have to like him," Ned said tiredly. "He knows this city and I do not, and he was your Aunt Catalan's friend." "He was," Jon agreed. "And now he runs the king's gold in a kingdom that's 6 million in debt, and he smiles while he does it, and the gold goes in and the gold goes out, and somehow he gets richer. Father, a man who profits while the realm starves isn't anyone's friend. He's only working out what you're worth." Ned looked at him for a long moment, and Jon saw something flicker in his eyes, surprise and a kind of sorrow. "You've a suspicious mind for one so young. You gave it to me." Jon said quietly, "In the crypts, you taught me that the men who smile while they tell you a kindness are often the ones holding the knife. I'm only doing what you told me, Father. I'm looking for the knife." His father had no answer to that. He turned back to his papers, and he went on trusting Littlefinger because he had no other choice, and because Ned Stark was a man who could not quite believe in the marrow of him that an old friend of his wife's would truly mean him harm. Jon watched him do it and said no more, but he marked it. He marked it the way he marked everything now, and he made a small, cold promise to himself that whatever happened, he would keep one eye always on the smiling little man with the pointed beard. Then there was the other one, the spider. Lord Varys had no beard and no balls, and no past that anyone could name. A soft, round, powdered eunuch who glided through the red keep in slippers and silk, and seemed to know a thing before it had finished happening. He was the master of whisperers, the king's spymaster, and where Littlefinger frightened Jon with his hunger, Varys frightened him with his stillness. The eunuch had a way of looking at a person as if reading a letter written on the inside of their skull. Twice Jon caught those soft eyes resting on him, the nameless bastard at the back, a beat too long, with a small, mild curiosity that made the hair rise on his arms. "That one watches you," Jon told his father. "The eunuch. The eunuch watches everyone. It is his trade." But Jon was not so sure. There was a thing he had heard, a whisper of a whisper, that the spider had served the Targaryens once in the old days before the city fell, and that no one quite knew where his true loyalty had ever gone after. A man who had served dragons, watching a boy with a dragon's blood a beat too long. Jon told himself it was nothing. He told himself a great many things in those days were nothing and was wrong about most of them and would learn it too late. It was the matter of the old hand's death that finally drove Jon to do the dangerous thing. His father had come to King's Landing chasing a ghost. Jon Arryn, the man who had raised both Ned and Robert as boys, dead these few months of a sudden fever that his widow swore was poison. Ned meant to learn the truth of it quietly, the honorable way, asking careful questions of careful men. But the careful men were frightened, and the trail was cold, and every door Ned knocked on softly seemed to close softer still. Jon watched his father grope blind through the dark after a killer, and he watched the killer, whoever it was, watching his father do it, and he could not bear it. So one moonless night, when the Red Keep slept, Jon lay down on his narrow bed in the Tower of the Hand, and he closed his eyes and he went into the wolf. It came easier than it ever had, too easy here, as if the old red stones themselves were thin in places and the skin between Jon and Ghost thinner still. One breath he was a young man on a hard bed, the next he was 4 legs and a cold nose in a world made entirely of scent, padding silent on great soft paws down a servant's stair, a white shadow in a black castle. Tyrion's words came back to him. A clever rat could go anywhere in that castle. And Jon sent the wolf along the hidden ways, the dry passages behind the walls, his ears pricked, his nose full of the 1,000 secrets a stone keep breathes out in the dark. He learned things that night that no questioning ever would have won. He learned the smell of fear on the gold cloaks who guarded doors they would not name. He learned which cellars held more wine than any household could drink, and which held no wine at all. And near the dawn, in a small room high in a tower he had no name for, the wolf's ears caught 2 voices he knew, a man's golden and lazy, a woman's golden and cold, speaking low and close in a way a brother and a sister had no business speaking. And Jon, listening through the wolf, heard a fragment of a thing that stopped his borrowed heart. The old fool worked it out from a book in the end. A book, All those years, and it was the hand's own dull little book of names that nearly undid us. If Lord Stark has half the wit Arryn had, Lord Stark, said the woman's voice, has honor instead of wit, and honor is a leash. Let him pull on it, he'll only hang himself the faster. A laugh, low and intimate, the brush of cloth. And the wolf, pressed to the cold stone behind the wall, understood with an animal certainty that it had heard a thing it was never meant to hear, a thing men killed to keep. And then a guard's torch turned a corner, and the firelight caught two coals of red eye in the dark, and a man shouted. And Ghost was running. It was very near. A crossbow sang, and a bolt sparked off the stone a hand's breadth from the wolf's flank. Boots hammered. A voice cried that there was a beast loose in the walls. Ghost ran the hidden ways faster than any man could follow, down, and burst out at last through a broken grate into the cold night air of the godswood, his heart slamming, his white coat slicked with the sweat of a hunted thing. And in the tower of the hand, Jon Snow sat bolt upright in his bed and pitched forward and was violently sick. He paid for it. He had known he would. He always paid for the wolf, and he had never gone so far or stayed so long or run so hard, and the bill came due all at once. For 2 days Jon could not rise. His head split as though an axe were buried in it. His nose bled at the slightest movement, bright and sudden, soaking the rag he kept pressed to his face. Food would not stay down, and worst of all was the swimming, lurching uncertainty of which body he was in. So that he would reach for a cup and find his hand half expecting a paw. He told the household he had taken a fever from the bad city air, and they believed it, because everyone in King's Landing was always half sick of something. Only Ghost knew the truth, curled against him those 2 days with his great head heavy on Jon's chest, and only Ghost ever would. But on the 3rd day Jon rose, pale and hollowed, and sat by the narrow window with the city spread below him, and made himself think the thing through cold. A book. The old fool worked it out from a book of names. The hand's own book. He had it from his father in scraps, without his father knowing he was building anything from the scraps. Ned had been to see an armorer in the Street of Steel, chasing Jon Arryn's last days, and there had found a great hulking apprentice boy with a bull's neck and a shock of thick black hair and Robert's own blue eyes, one of the king's bastards, sown across the city like seed, and every one of them. Every single one, black of hair and Baratheon to the bone. Jon Arryn had gone to see that boy in his last weeks. Jon Arryn had been reading an old book, a great dull tome of lineages, the histories of the noble houses who had wed whom and what had come of it, and the color of their hair down the long generations. The seed is strong, the old man had said before he died, and no one had known what he meant. Jon knew now. Sitting at that window, sick and gray, he put the last piece in place with hands that wanted to shake. Robert's bastards were all black-haired. Robert's blood ran true and dark and strong, generation on generation, stag after stag. The seed is strong. But the king's 3 true-born children, the Prince Joffrey and the little ones, the heirs to the Iron Throne itself, were golden. Lannister golden. Everyone, not a stag among them. They were not Robert's children at all. And the only other gold in the royal bed belonged to the queen's own twin brother, the beautiful bored knight in the white cloak. And Jon had heard them not 3 nights past. Golden voices in a high dark room, speaking low and close the way no brother and sister should. That was the secret. That was what the old hand had died for. That was the knife behind every smile in this whole golden poisoned city. That the queen's children were no kings, that the boy who would one day take the throne was got in incest and treason, and that Cersei Lannister would burn the realm to ash before she let it be known. And his father, his honest, honorable, doomed father, was pulling on that very thread this very week, in the open, in good faith, certain that the truth was a thing that set men free. Jon pressed the bloody rag to his nose and stared down at the great, cruel, beautiful city, and for the first time he understood, all the way down, what his father had truly given him in that crypt. Not a name, not a claim, a way of seeing. He had seen the trap a full week before Ned would stumble into it. The question, the only question that mattered now, the one that would gnaw at him through every hour to come, was what in the 7 hells a nameless bastard was supposed to do with the seeing. He found his answer to none of it that day, but he found Arya, which was almost as good. She had been miserable in King's Landing. Sansa had the prince and the songs and the gowns, and Arya had a septa who despaired of her, and a father too busy drowning to notice his youngest going wild. until Ned, in one of the few wholly good decisions Jon ever saw him make at court, had found her a dancing master, not the simpering kind. A small, bald Bravosi named Sirio Forel, who had been the first sword of the Sea Lord of Bravos, and who taught Arya something he called water dancing, which as far as Jon could tell was simply sword fighting dressed in prettier words so that no one would object to a highborn girl learning to kill. Jon came upon them in a long, empty hall, Arya balanced on one foot like a heron, needle a thin, bright line in her fist, sweat on her brow, and a fierce joy on her face he had not seen since Winterfell. "Watch this," she commanded, not lowering the blade. "Sirio says I'm quick. He says I'm the quickest he's taught in years. He says the others were oxen, and I'm a cat." "Oxen," Jon said, "and a cat would be insulted by the comparison to you. Cats sleep all day. You've never been still a heartbeat in your life. Sirio says stillness is just quickness waiting." Arya informed him loftily and promptly fell off her one foot. She recovered with the boneless ease of the very young and the very limber and glared at him as though it were his fault. "You're distracting me. Are you well? You look like something the hounds dug up." "Mother always said the South would make you sick, and I said you were too stubborn to get sick, and now you've gone and made a liar of me, which is rude." "My apologies," Jon said solemnly. "I'll try to be less of a corpse. See that you do." She lowered Needle at last and looked at him with that sudden disconcerting directness she had, the gift of a child who has not yet learned to look away from what she sees. "You've gone strange since Winterfell. Quiet strange. You used to laugh more." "I'm only tired, little wolf." "You're only lying," she said, but gently, and did not press it, because even Arya knew there were doors in people you did not push on. She gave him a quick, fierce hug instead, all sharp elbows and damp hair, and went back to her heron stand and her water dancing, and Jon stood in the doorway and watched her a while longer than he needed to. This, he thought. Not the throne, not the claim, not the great red weight of all that lost grandeur. This skinny, fierce, laughing girl with a sword too small for anyone but her. His father, asleep over his honest, doomed papers. Sansa, who thought the world was a song. These were the things the secret was truly for, not a crown to win but a family to keep, in a city that ate families for sport. Whatever he chose to do with what he was, Jon swore to himself in that empty hall he would choose it for them. He had spent 16 years with no one but the dead in the crypts. He would not lose the living too. He would not. That night, drained dry and dreading sleep, Jon dreamed of fire again, the black plain, the bruised sky, the vast slow beat of wings. The silver-haired girl stood in her ring of flame, unburned, her arms thrown wide, and she was nearer now than she had been at Winterfell, or perhaps Jon was. He could see her face. She was young, no older than he, and there was a terrible new hardness in her, and behind her in the wounded sky the three shadows had grown. They were no longer far-off specks. They were dragons, true dragons, black and green and gold, wheeling over a burning country with a sound like the end of the world. And the girl looked up at them with a queen's eyes, and the whole sky answered her. She turned her head, and across the fire and the years she seemed to look straight at him, and her lips moved, and though no sound crossed the burning gulf between them, Jon somehow knew the shape of the word. "Home," she said. Or perhaps it was a name, he could not tell. Jon woke in the gray dawn with the taste of smoke in his throat, and his heart full of a thing he could not name. Half dread, half a strange wild longing, as though somewhere across the whole wide world a door he had never seen had quietly come ajar. Across the narrow sea, the last daughter of his father's house was waking dragons that had been dead 300 years. The blood of the dragon was loose in the world again, rising in the east as surely as the cold was rising in the north. And Jon Snow lay in a dead king's castle with that same blood beating in his own veins, hiding it, hoarding the deadliest secret in the realm. And watching the slow, honorable ruin of the only father he had ever known draw closer with every passing day, Ghost lifted his head in the half-dark and looked at him with eyes like two red suns. "I know," Jon whispered. "It's coming, all of it." He set his jaw. "And this time I mean to see it before it gets here." Jon knew his father was going to die the moment Ned told him, with quiet pride, what he had done. "I gave her a chance," Ned said. They were alone in the hand solar, the candles low, the city dark beyond the window. "The queen. I told her I know the truth of her children, that they are no true-born heirs, that the throne is built on a lie, and I gave her leave to take them and go far from Robert's wrath before I lay it before the king. I would not see children butchered for their mother's sins." There has been enough of that in my life." He looked almost peaceful. "I gave her mercy, Jon. It was the honorable thing." Jon felt the floor drop away beneath him. "Father," he said very carefully, the way you speak to a man standing on a ledge. "You told Cersei Lannister, the most dangerous woman in the Seven Kingdoms, that you hold the one secret that can destroy her and her children both. And then you let her walk away. You didn't give her mercy, you gave her warning. You told the lioness you mean to come for her cubs, and then you let her go home to sharpen her claws. She is a mother, Jon. She is a Lannister." Jon was almost pleading now. "A cornered Lannister with everything to lose. She will not run, she will strike, and she has had 3 days to do it." "Father, where is the king? Where is Robert right now?" Ned frowned. "Hunting. He took half the court into the Kingswood after a White Hart. He'll be back within the—" He stopped. Some of the color went out of his face. "He took the queen's cousin with him, the Lannister boy, Lancel, to carry his wine." The two of them looked at each other in the candlelight, and neither said the thing they were both thinking, because to say it aloud was to make it real. A drunk king, a boar in the wood, a cup poured by Lannister hands. That night, before either of them slept, Ned came to Jon's chamber and gave him the parchment. Jon knew it at once. The old yellowed roll bound in faded ribbon, the dark cracked wax. The record of a marriage in a Dornish sept. The proof that Jon Snow was no bastard. His father set it in his hands and closed the boy's fingers around it, and his gray eyes were grave. "Why are you giving me this now?" "Because I have made a powerful enemy," Ned said simply, "and a wise man scatters what he loves where his enemies cannot reach it all at once." "If anything should happen to me," Jon started to protest, and Ned raised a hand. "If anything should happen to me, Jon, this is the one thing in the world that might keep you alive, not as a weapon, as a shield. There are Targaryens yet across the sea, and the wind is changing, and a day may come when being the trueborn heir of that house is the only card a man has left to play. I pray that day never comes for you. But if it does, you must hold this, and you must keep it, and you must show it to no one until your life depends upon it. Do you understand?" "I understand." Jon's throat was tight. "But nothing's going to happen to you. Because you're going to listen to me now, Father, the way you've taught me to listen to you. You cannot trust the men of this city. Not Littlefinger, not the Gold Cloaks, none of them. When you move against Cersei, and I know you will because you're you must have a way out that no one in King's Landing knows. A second plan, a bolt hole, promise me." It was the word his mother had used in the Tower of Blood, promise me. He saw it land in his father's eyes, saw Ned flinch from it and press the advantage shamelessly, because his father's life was worth a little shame. "Promise me," Jon said again. And Ned Stark, who had spent 16 years keeping one promise made in a bed of blood, looked at his sister's son and said heavily, "I promise." He did not entirely mean it. Jon could see that too. His father was a man who believed, in the deepest and most unkillable part of himself, that honor was a kind of armor, that if you only did the right thing the gods would see, and the right thing would win. It was the most beautiful thing about him, and it was going to get him killed. And Jon could no more cut it out of him than cut out his heart, so Jon made his own plan instead. That very night, while the castle slept, he went into the wolf one more time, carefully this time, not deep, not long, mindful of the cost. And he sent Ghost soft-footed through the hidden ways behind the walls, and he mapped them. Every dry passage, every false door, every forgotten stair that the masons of cruel old Meager had built and died to keep secret. He learned the bones of the Red Keep that night, the secret skeleton beneath the red flesh of it, the ways a clever rat might come and go unseen. He did not know yet how he would use them. He only knew, with the cold certainty that had not once led him wrong since the crypts, that he was going to need a way through the walls of this castle when the killing started, and that the killing was very close. They brought the king back 2 days later on a litter, and the smell reached the courtyard before the litter did. The boar had opened Robert Baratheon from groin to nipple, and no Meister's art could close a wound like that, and everyone who looked at the gray, sweating ruin of the king's face knew it for a dead man's face already. They carried him to his chambers, and the city held its breath. Jon stood in the corner of that reeking room, a servant, a shadow, while the greatest men of the realm gathered around the bed of the dying king, and he watched Robert Baratheon take a very long time to die. The king was drunk, even now. They had given him milk of the poppy and dream wine for the pain, and he drifted in and out, and in his clear moments he was, of all things, funny. That was the thing that undid Jon a little. The man who had killed his father dying was funny. Should have never let the boy pour my wine, Robert rasped at one point to no one. Couldn't pour piss out of a boot, that one, Lannisters. Pretty as a picture, every last one, and not a drop of sense between them. He coughed wetly. The boar got me fair, though, big bastard. Got him too, in the end. Did anyone tell you that? Gutted him. We'll eat him at the feast, my last good kill. He almost smiled. Tell the singers I died with my boots on. Don't tell them about the wine. Then his clear moments came less, and the gray took him deeper, and he called for Ned. And they cleared the room of all but the hand and a few, and Jon, being no one, being furniture, was forgotten in his corner and so heard it all. He heard the king name Ned Stark, the protector of the realm, to rule until the prince came of age. He heard Ned, ever honorable, write down the king's failing words, and he saw his father's quill hesitate over the parchment at the place where the king said, "My son Joffrey," and write instead, "My heir," because Ned Stark could not bring himself even now to set a known lie in a dying man's last will. Jon watched him do it and wanted to weep or scream. That small, honest swerve of the quill was the whole tragedy in a single stroke. His father could not lie even to save them all, and could not tell the truth either, and so split the difference with a word, and a word would not be enough. A word never was in this city. Near the end, when the poppy had him and the room had thinned, the king's wandering eye found Jon in his corner, the dark-haired servant boy, no one, furniture, and held there the way it had held in the yard at Winterfell a lifetime ago. "You," Robert breathed. "You again, the northern boy. Come here, lad, let me look at you." And Jon, because there was no refusing even a dying king, came and knelt by the bed of the man who had killed his father and let that ruined, drowning gaze rest on his face one last time. "There." Robert murmured, almost tender, almost gone. "The look. I keep seeing it's the cold does it. Makes you all look like you're grieving. You're grieving something, boy, I can see it. We all are. We're all just grieving something we lost in the snow." His eyes drifted closed. He did not see Jon's hand shaking. He never saw anything true in his whole life, Jon thought, and grieved for that too, helplessly, against his own will, grieved for the great ruined wreck of a man who had loved Jon's mother so much he had burned a dynasty for her, and never once guessed that her son was kneeling at his deathbed, wearing her face. Robert Baratheon, first of his name, died a little before dawn, asking for someone named Lyanna, and not one man in that room but Jon Snow knew that the woman the king cried out for with his last breath was the grandmother of the very boy he had just, in his blindness, named his heir. After that, everything moved very fast, the way an avalanche moves fast, slow and silent at the top, and then all at once. And then it is far too late to run. Ned meant to do the right thing. Of course he did. With the king dead and himself named protector, the law was plain. Joffrey was no trueborn son, no rightful heir, and the throne by every right passed to Robert's brother Stannis, a hard, cold, humorless man, but the lawful king. Ned would not seize power for himself. Renly offered him swords to take the boy prince in the night, and Ned refused him, called it treason, sent him away. Ned would not flee. Jon begged him to take the girls and ride north that very hour, and Ned would not hear of it. For the realm needed a lawful succession, and a Stark did not run from his duty. Ned would do it openly in the light before the court, the honorable way. Denounce the false king, proclaim the true one, and trust the law to hold, and to make the law hold he needed swords. He needed the city watch, the gold cloaks, 2,000 strong, who kept King's Landing. And the man who could deliver the gold cloaks was Petyr Baelish. No, Jon said when he heard it. They were in the solar again the last hours, and Jon had abandoned all pretense of a servant's distance. "Father, no, not him, anyone but him. He has bought the captains of the watch," Ned said. "Gold given quietly over years. He swears they'll answer my word over the queens when the moment comes. He has no love for the Lannisters. He has no love for anyone." Jon's voice cracked. "Father, listen to me, please, just this once. A man who buys the gold cloaks in secret over years did not do it for you. He did it for himself. He has been climbing this whole rotten ladder his entire life, and he is not going to hand you the top of it out of friendship for a wife you share. The moment you stand in that throne room and you have no swords but his, the moment your life rests entirely in his hands, ask yourself which is worth more to him. Your honest northern friendship, or whatever the Lannisters will pay him for your head. Ask yourself that, and then look me in the eye and tell me you trust him." For a long moment Ned was silent, And Jon saw, for the first time, a flicker of true doubt cross his father's face, saw the words land, saw them take root. He thought for one wild, hopeful heartbeat that he had done it, that he had moved the unmovable man. "What would you have me do?" Ned asked quietly. "Truly, Jon, the king is dead, the boy will be crowned within the day. If I do nothing, a false king built on incest and murder takes the Iron Throne, and every law of gods and men is made a lie. I cannot do nothing, and I have no other swords, if not Baelish, who—" And Jon had no answer. That was the horror of it. His father was not a fool. He was a good man in a trap with no good way out, and the only way out Jon could see was the one thing he could not yet do: reveal himself, throw the last Targaryen heir onto the table, change the whole game. He was not ready. He did not know how. The words stuck in his throat like a bone. "Then at least," Jon said at last, low and fierce, "don't stand in the open with no way out. Keep your household close to the door, not the throne. Have horses saddled and waiting at the mud gate. And the girls, send Sansa and Arya somewhere safe before you move, tonight this hour, away from the keep." "Sansa," Ned said, and stopped, and something terrible crossed his face. Sansa loves the prince, Jon. She's to be his queen, she thinks. When I told her we might leave the city, she wept, and the bone in Jon's throat became ice in his belly. "Father, what did Sansa do?" "I cannot know that she said anything." "What did she do?" "She may have gone to the queen," Ned whispered, "to beg not to be taken from her betrothed." And there it was, the last lock clicking shut on a trap that had been 3 days closing. Cersei warned. The king dead by poison no one could prove. Sansa's innocent heart turned to a hostage by her own loving mouth. The gold cloaks bought by a man who served only himself. Jon saw the whole shape of it at last, complete and perfect and lethal, and saw that even now, even seeing it all, he could not stop it without burning the one card his father had begged him to keep hidden. "Then I'll make my own arrangements," Jon said, and his voice had gone very quiet and very cold, a voice he did not recognize as his own. "You do what you must, father, so will I." When the trap closed, Jon Snow was in the walls. He had not gone to the throne room with his father's household. He had embraced Ned at the door of the Tower of the Hand. A long, hard, wordless embrace, because some part of each of them knew. And then, while the Stark men marched out in their gray and white to set a true king on the throne, Jon had slipped the other way. Down a servant's stair and through a false door he had mapped in the body of a wolf into the hidden skeleton of the Red Keep. If the gold cloaks held, he would never be missed. If they did not, if Jon was right, and being right had never once felt so much like grief, then someone outside the killing box would have to be left alive to do what came next. He crept through the dark behind the walls until he reached the throne room, and he put his eye to a gap in the stone where the mortar had crumbled, and he watched the end of his father's honor. It went exactly as Jon had known it would, and knowing did not make it bearable. He watched Ned stand before the Iron Throne, gray and grave and certain, and proclaim the truth, that Joffrey was no king, that Stannis was the lawful heir. He watched the gold cloaks of the City Watch fill the hall at his father's back, 2,000 swords, the swords Littlefinger had sworn would answer the hand's word. And he watched them, at a small nod from a small smiling man with a pointed beard, turn their spears around. It was very quick after that. The Stark men died where they stood, cut down from behind by the very swords meant to guard them, and the sound of it, the screams, the steel, the wet, awful sounds of men dying surprised, came to Jon through the wall muffled and small and would live in his ears until the day he died. He saw Littlefinger step up behind his father, almost gently, and lay a dagger against the pale skin of Ned Stark's throat, and he saw the little man's lips move, and though Jon could not hear the words across the dying hall, he had no need to. He knew what Petyr Baelish said. He had said it to Jon himself, in a manner of speaking, weeks ago through his father's stubborn ears. "I did warn you not to trust me." Ned Stark was taken, not killed. They wanted him alive. Jon understood. A living traitor could be made to confess, could be made to serve, where a dead one only made a martyr. They dragged the hand of the king away to the black cells beneath the Red Keep, and Jon Snow knelt in the dark behind the wall with the blood roaring in his ears and the proof of his own blood pressed against his heart, and did not move and did not breathe and could not weep. Because there was no time left in the world for weeping. Somewhere far off in the keep, he heard the high clear ring of a small fast blade and a girl's voice raised once in defiance, and then the shouts of men who had found something quicker than they were. Sirio, Arya, he could not go to them. He could only pray in the language of the wordless wolf that the little Bravosi was as good as his boasts, that stillness was indeed only quickness waiting, and that somewhere in the screaming chaos of that day, a skinny, fierce girl with a sword too small for anyone but her was running, running. Getting clear, getting gone. He nearly did not get clear himself. Gold cloaks were sweeping the keep for hidden Stark men, and twice their torches came searching down the very passages Jon crouched in, so close he could smell the pitch and hear them cursing the dark and the rats. Once a guard's hand groped through a gap in the stone not a foot from Jon's face, fat fingers grasping at nothing. And Jon pressed himself flat and silent against the cold inner wall and did not breathe and felt Ghost go rigid and murderous beside him in the black. A snarl building in the great chest that one sound would unleash and damn them both. Jon laid a hand on the wolf's neck. Still, still. And the fingers withdrew and the torch moved on and the dark swallowed them again, and Jon understood in his bones what the wolf had taught him and the city had confirmed. That the unseen thing survives and the seen thing dies. And he had spent his whole life unseen for exactly this hour without ever knowing why. Jon stayed in the walls until full dark, and then he went out into the city. King's Landing had gone mad. The gold cloaks were in the streets, dragging Stark men from their hiding holes. The boy Joffrey was king now, golden and incestuous and cruel, and the realm did not yet know it had been robbed. Sansa was a hostage in the Red Keep, a bird in a golden cage, her loving foolish heart the key that had locked her in. Arya was loose in the city or dead in it, Jon could not know which. And his father, the only father he had ever known, the man who had carried him out of a bed of blood and loved him 16 years, and given him a name to wear and a truth to bear. His father lay in the black cells under the castle, awaiting a traitor's death. Jon pulled his hood low and slipped through the burning, brawling dark, Ghost a white shadow at his heels, and he made himself think. His father had been right about everything except the one thing that mattered. That honor would be enough. It had not been enough. Honor had been a leash, exactly as the queen had said, and they had let him pull on it until he hanged himself, just as she had promised. The honest way was finished. The honest way was bleeding out on the floor of the throne room with 2,000 traitors' swords in its back. Which left only the other way, the way of the liars and the spiders and the men who climbed. The way Jon had sworn in a Winterfell crypt he would never have to walk. He stopped in the shadow of a sept and pressed his back to the cold stone and took the old yellowed parchment from inside his cloak and held it and looked at it in the light of the burning city. The proof, the shield, the last card. Show it to no one, his father had said, until your life depends upon it. But it was not Jon's life that depended upon it now. It was Ned's. And Jon had spent 16 years being no one beneath notice, a bastard at the back of the hall, and he understood at last with a terrible cold clarity that no one could not save his father. Only a dragon could. Only the one thing in all the world that the spiders and the schemers of this poisoned city would crawl over each other to possess. A true Targaryen heir, trueborn, with the blood of the conqueror in his veins and the proof of it in his hand. There was a man in that castle who had served the dragons once. A soft, round, powdered man who watched a nameless bastard a beat too long. A man who, the whispers said, had spent his whole strange life waiting and working for the day a worthy dragon might come again to set the realm to rights. Jon Snow looked down at the proof of who he was, and then up at the great red brooding bulk of the Red Keep against the burning sky, and made the choice that would change everything, the choice to stop hiding and start playing. And gamble the deadliest secret in the 7 kingdoms on the slender hope that the spider's hunger might be made to serve a Stark. Ghost, he murmured, we're going to go and find a spider. The direwolf showed his teeth in the dark, and the two of them turned back toward the castle, and the long game entered its last and most dangerous turn. Jon had thought himself the only thing moving unseen in the bones of the Red Keep. He was wrong, and he learned it the way a man learns most true things in that castle, too late, in the dark, with no good choices left. He was 3 turnings from the black cells, Ghost a silent white shape at his shoulder, the proof of his blood warm against his heart, when a soft voice spoke out of the blackness ahead of him as easily as if they sat together at a feast. You will not reach him that way, said Lord Varys. There are 6 gold cloaks between you and your father's cell, and they are frightened men, and frightened men with spears do not pause to ask a boy his name. You would die in the dark and your wolf with you, and tomorrow your father would lose his head none the wiser that you ever tried. A waste. I do so hate a waste. A small light bloomed, a single shrouded candle, and there he was, round and soft and powdered, in a plain brown rough-spun robe instead of his court silks, smiling his mild and bottomless smile. He did not look at all surprised to find a stark bastard and a direwolf in his secret passages at the dead of night. He looked, Jon thought with a chill, like a man who had been waiting. Ghost's hackles rose, a low sound built in the wolf's chest. "Oh, peace," said Varys to the direwolf, untroubled. "If I wished you taken, child, the spears would already be here. I came alone, and I came to you, which should tell you something. I am a great many wicked things, but I am not, at this particular moment, your enemy. Walk with me. We have a little time, and you and I have a great deal to say to one another, more, I think, than you yet know." They walked the hidden ways together, the eunuch and the wolf boy, the shrouded candle throwing their shadows huge and strange across the old stone. "You have been a great puzzle to me, Jon Snow," Varys said, almost fondly. "From the day you rode through the gate, a bastard of the north who watches a room the way a master watches a board, a bastard whose lord father keeps him closer than a son and whispers to him at night as to no one else. A bastard who is suddenly, after 16 years of meaning to take the black, most particularly determined not to." He glanced up, his eyes glittering in the candlelight. "And a bastard who has the look, forgive an old eunuch his fancies, of a face I knew once, long ago, when there were still dragons in this castle, and I was a younger and more foolish man. So I will ask you plainly, here in the dark where plain asking is safe, and I will know if you lie to me, for knowing is my trade. Who was your mother, child?" Jon stopped walking. This was the edge of the cliff his father had warned him of in the crypts a lifetime ago. One word, and there was no stepping back from it, ever. The secret 3 living souls had carried and died to keep would belong to a fourth, and not just any fourth, but the most dangerous, most slippery, least knowable man in the 7 kingdoms. His father's voice whispered in him, "Every soul that learns it is one more sword that might fall on your neck," and his own cold new voice answered, "And yet no one can save him. Only a dragon can." Jon reached into his cloak and drew out the old yellowed parchment and held it out into the candlelight. "My mother was Lyanna Stark," he said. His voice did not shake. He was a little surprised that it did not shake. "My father was Rhaegar Targaryen. They were wed in secret before gods and men, in a sept in the mountains of Dorne, and this is the record of it, kept these 16 years by the one man my uncle Ned trusted with the truth. I am no bastard, Lord Varys. I am the true-born son of the last prince of Dragonstone, and by every law of the 7 kingdoms I am the heir of House Targaryen. And I have come to make a bargain with you for my father's life." For a long moment Varys did not move. He took the parchment in his soft, powdered hands as though it were a holy thing, and he read it by the shrouded candle. And Jon watched something pass across that smooth, round face that he had not believed it capable of, something raw, something almost like grief or joy or both at once. The look of a man who has prayed his whole life to a god he never truly believed would answer, and has just heard the answer in the dark. "Trueborn," Varys breathed. "All these years. All these years I have schemed and whispered and shed blood for the dream of a worthy dragon, and I have had to make do with lesser hopes. Pretenders, promises, children across the sea I could only pray would grow straight." His hands trembled just slightly around the parchment. "And here you stand. The son of Rhaegar, whom I loved. Yes, child, I loved him, the whole realm loved him. He was everything a king should be, and he died in a river for a woman, the fool, the beautiful fool, and he left a son. Trueborn, raised in honor in the cold clean north, far from all this rot." He looked up, and his eyes were wet, and Jon could not for his life tell how much of it was true. "You could not have brought me a gift I wanted more if you had brought me the head of every man who ever wronged me. Ask then. Ask your bargain, dragon. I am listening as I have never listened to anyone." "Save my father," Jon said. "Ned Stark, get him out of this city alive, do that and," he made himself say at the price the thing he was selling, "and you will have me. A true heir with proof, the thing you've waited your whole life for. But the price of the dragon is the wolf. Save him, or I throw this parchment in the nearest fire and take my secret to the wall, and you can scheme another 16 years for a hope that died of spite. Those are my terms." Varys laughed softly, a real laugh, delighted, surprised. "Oh, you are his son." And hers, the fire and the ice both. Rhaegar would never have thought to threaten me, he was too noble, Lyanna would have done nothing else. He pressed the parchment back into Jon's hands, closing the boy's fingers over it exactly as Ned had done. Keep it safe. The paper is the least of it now, child. Proof is only a story men agree to believe, and I am very good at stories. What matters is that I have seen your face, and I have read the truth in it, and I will know you anywhere in the world from this night to the last of my days. That is the true bargain you have struck, not paper. Knowing, you have given the spider your secret, and the spider keeps what he has given. He smiled, and there was steel in the mildness now. But you have also given the spider what he has wanted above all things. So yes, Jon of House Targaryen. I will save your father. Let me tell you how, and let me tell you what it will cost, for everything in this city costs, and the things worth having cost the most. There was already a plan in motion. Varys explained, and it was not Jon's, and it was not Varys's either, and that was precisely the danger of it. Cersei did not want Ned Stark dead. A dead Ned Stark was a martyr, and a martyr would bring the North down on King's Landing like a gray avalanche, with the boy Robb at its head and 20,000 swords behind him. What the Queen wanted was Ned Stark broken, made to stand before the whole city and confess himself a traitor, to name Joffrey the true king with his own honorable mouth, to throw his honor on the fire with his own hands. A confessed traitor sent to live out his days in the black of the Night's Watch was no martyr, he was a warning. And Sansa, the gentle hostage, had wept and begged for her father's life, and so the bargain had been struck. Ned would confess, and Ned would take the black, and Ned would live. Take me to him, Jon said. Before he does it, I have to see him. Varys took him because Varys could take a man anywhere in that castle, and so it was that Jon Snow looked upon his father one last time in a cell beneath the world, through the bars of a small grate by the light of a single candle. Ned Stark was a ruin. They had not racked him. They did not need to. They had something crueler than the rack. They had his daughters. He sat against the wall of his cell, thin and filthy and gray, his leg gone bad beneath him, and when he heard Jon's whisper through the grate he lifted his head, and his eyes broke Jon's heart clean in two. There was such shame in them. You should not be here, Ned rasped. If they find you, they won't. I have a friend now, a strange one. Father, listen, you don't have to do this. The confession, I can get you out tonight this hour. No, Ned's voice, even ruined, was iron. Sansa, they have Sansa, Jon. If I run, they kill her. If I fight, they kill her. The only road that ends with my girl alive is the one where I stand up before the gods in the city and call myself a traitor and a liar. Something terrible moved in his gray face. Do you understand what they ask of me? Not my life. My life they could have and welcome. They ask my honor. They ask me to stand before the realm and unsay every true thing I ever swore and bless a lie and bend my neck to it so that my daughter might live. And I am going to do it, Jon. I am going to do it gladly. I have learned too late the thing your mother knew at the end, the thing I have never let myself believe. His eyes found Jon's through the bars. That there is no honor worth a child's life. None. I would burn every shred of mine to ash and call it a fair trade and never once look back. Promise me you understand that. Promise me you will remember it when your own turn comes, and it will come, for you are mine and hers both, and the gods are not done with our family yet. I promise. Jon whispered the third such promise of his short life and meant it as he had meant the others with his whole splitting heart. Good. Ned closed his eyes. Then go live. Be the man the blood made you, or unmake it and be a better one. I never cared which, Jon. I only ever wanted you to live to choose. Now go before the spider's mercy runs out. Jon went. But not far and not to safety and not without a plan of his own, because his father meant to trust the bargain, and Jon Snow had learned in this city exactly what the bargains of liars were worth. Varys agreed with him. The queen will keep her word, the eunuch murmured as they crept away. She is cruel, but she is not a fool, and she knows a dead Stark is a dear price. No, it is not the queen I fear, he paused. It is the boy. Joffrey is a queen's son and a king's crown and a cruel child's heart, and he loves nothing in the world so much as the sound of his own command. And a cruel child, given a throne, will sooner or later do the one thing no one wise has told him he may do, simply to prove that he may. We must be ready for the day the boy decides to be a king. The whole city came to watch Ned Stark confess, and Jon Snow was among them, hooded and unremarkable, with a direwolf hidden in a cart and an old black brother of the Night's Watch at his side. Yoren was the man's name, stooped and sour and stinking of the road, a wandering crow comes south to gather recruits for the wall. And the one man in King's Landing Varys swore could be trusted. Because Yoren wanted nothing from anyone but bodies for the watch, and had no loyalty to spend on Lannisters. He had agreed to the thing for reasons of his own that Jon never fully learned. He chewed sourleaf and spat red and looked at the great crowd packing the square before the great sept of Baelor with the flat eyes of a man who had seen 100 such crowds and trusted not one. When it goes wrong, Yoren said quietly, not if Jon noted, when it'll go wrong fast. Smoke first. You'll know it. Then you do exactly as we said and not one thing more, boy, you hear? You're no good to your father dead, and I'll not drag a dead hero out of this square. Then they brought Ned out, and the square fell to a roar, and the roar fell to a hush. He looked so small upon the high steps of the sept, between the gold cloaks and the white marble, with the boy king lounging cruel and golden above him and the whole realm staring up. But he stood. He found his feet and he stood, and he lifted his ruined gray head, and in a voice that carried thin and clear across that vast-held breath, he said the words they had given him to say. He named himself a traitor. He named himself a liar. He proclaimed Joffrey the one true king, true-born and rightful, and unsaid with his own mouth every true thing he had died trying to tell. Jon stood in the crowd with his nails biting bloody crescents into his palms and watched his honorable father burn his honor to ash to buy a daughter's life. And he had never loved him more, and he had never been so sure that love and honor were two different gods, and that his father had finally, at the very end, learned to kneel to the right one. It should have ended there. By every bargain struck in every shadow of that castle, it should have ended with a confessed traitor sent north to the cold to be forgotten. But there was a girl high on the steps in a gray gown, white-faced and weeping, Sansa reaching toward her father, held fast by guards. And there was a queen leaning to her son, her face urgent, saying the wise thing, the agreed thing sent him to the wall. And there was a boy upon a throne who had been told, all his short, cruel life, what he might not do. Joffrey rose, golden and smiling, and lifted his hand for silence, and gave it the single cruel command that no one wise had told him he was allowed to give. Kill him. The square came apart. The queen surged to her feet. The Septons cried out, Sansa screamed. And the great headsman Ilyn Payne, who never spoke and never hesitated, drew the long Valyrian greatsword that had been Ned's own ice, his own ancestral blade. Turned now to take his head and force the Lord of Winterfell down onto the marble. And then, just as Yoren had promised, there was smoke. It came up thick and sudden and choking from a dozen places at the edges of the square at once. Varys' little birds, his nameless children, lighting the smoke pots they had hidden in the gutters and the carts and the dark mouths of the alleys. And in a single heartbeat, the packed square turned from a crowd into a stampede. 500,000 terrified souls do not think. They run. They ran now, screaming of fire and dragons and the end of the world, surging in every direction, and the cordon of gold cloaks that had held the square so neatly dissolved into a thrashing chaos of bodies and elbows and panic. On the high steps, the smoke rolled up gray and blinding, and through it Jon could just see Ilyn Payne's blade lifted. Now, said Yoren, and shoved him forward, and Jon ran up the steps into the smoke with Ghost, a white nightmare, at his side, scattering screaming gold cloaks like leaves. What happened on those steps in the smoke, Jon could never afterward set in clean order. He remembered the great blade falling and a man's scream that was not his father's. One of Varys' birds, he would learn later, a condemned man dressed in stark gray and pushed into the blind smoke to take the stroke meant for Ned. So that when the smoke cleared there would be a headless body in northern colors on the marble and a realm that believed its traitor dead. He remembered hauling his father up off the stone by main force, Ned crying out as his bad leg took his weight. He remembered Yoren's voice and Yoren's knife, and the wet sounds as the old crow held the top of the stair against the men who came through the smoke after them, buying with his own stooped sour life the handful of breaths the others needed, for Yoren did not come down those steps again. And Jon did not see him fall and was glad of it and was ashamed of being glad, and he remembered Sansa. He saw her for one instant through the smoke, his sister, his cousin, white and screaming and reaching, dragged backward into the sept by the queen's own guards even as Jon dragged their father the other way, and their eyes met across the chaos, brother and sister, and Jon saw her see him. saw her recognize the bastard brother she had never much liked appearing like a ghost in the smoke to save the father she was losing, and then the guards had her, and the smoke took her, and she was gone. There was no reaching her. The whole the smoke, the birds, the dead man on the steps, all of it had been built to pull one man from the executioner's block, and it could not also storm a castle. Saving Ned meant leaving Sansa. Jon had known it when he agreed to the plan. Knowing did not stop it from tearing something out of him that he would carry empty for years. They went down through the undercroft of the sept, through a culvert that stank of the river, into the lightless wet beneath the city, Jon and a half-dead wounded man and a great white wolf. While above them the smoke cleared on a headless body in gray and a screaming city, and a boy king already telling the tale of how the traitor Stark had died as traitors die. The Crown would never admit he had escaped. To admit it was to admit weakness, and Cersei would sooner let the lie stand and her enemies believe their hero dead. Varys had reckoned it to the letter. The realm would mourn or cheer a dead Ned Stark, and the living one would bleed in the dark beneath their feet, and no one would ever come looking for a man already in his grave. A fishing boat carried them out of the city on the night tide, north along the coast, away. Ned lay in the bottom of the boat wrapped in Jon's cloak, fevered, his leg a ruin, his honor a ruin, alive. Jon sat over him through the long black hours with the proof of his blood against his heart and the lights of King's Landing falling away behind them, and he did not weep, though there was room enough now to weep at last. He had saved his father and lost his sister and made the spider the keeper of his soul, and he was no longer hiding from a single thing in the world, not from Varys, not from his father, not from himself. The bastard at the back of the hall was gone. He had burned away in the smoke of Baelor's steps, and what was left was a thing with no name yet, a thing that was Stark and Targaryen both, wolf and dragon, and meant to live. Toward dawn, exhausted past sleep, he dreamed the dream once more, the black plain, the burning sky. But it was not a dream of distance anymore, not a far-off girl glimpsed across the fire. She stood close enough to touch. Silver-haired, purple-eyed, hard and young and terrible and beautiful, with the 3 dragons grown vast at her back, real, awake, alive, the first dragons the world had seen in a century and a half, their wings spread against a sky the color of blood. Daenerys, his father's sister's child. His own aunt, younger than himself, the last other dragon in all the world. She looked at Jon across the fire, and this time he was certain she truly saw him, certain in the marrow of his bones, and she opened her mouth, and the word came clear across the burning gulf at last. "Blood," she said. "Blood of my blood." Jon woke in the gray dawn on the cold gray sea with his aunt's voice in his ears and his father breathing shallow beside him, and the whole broken board of the great game laid out before him at last. His father lived in secret, a dead man walking north. His sister Arya was lost somewhere in the wide and dangerous world. His sister Sansa was a captive in the lion's den. His brother Robb was raising the north to war beneath a banner that did not yet know its lord still drew breath. And far across the narrow sea, the only other dragon left alive was waking the oldest power in the world and turning her purple eyes at last toward home. The cold was rising in the north. The fire was rising in the east. And Jon Snow, trueborn son of Rhaegar and Lyanna, wolf and dragon, no one's bastard and no one's fool, sat in a fishing boat between the two with his hand on his father's brow and his wolf at his side, and understood that the time for hiding was over and the time for choosing had come.